What are your chiropractic blinders? What are your certainties that may be closing you off from new learning and preventing you getting your life and your practice to the next level? Listen to this episode with Rob Sinnott, where he is going to help to stretch your chiropractic mind. One of the biggest things you'll get from listening to this is how simple and effective communication about what you do comes from a deepened understanding of chiropractic philosophy, and how when we don't have that, we tend to have an inferiority complex that makes us overcompensate for our lack of understanding. Hi, I'm Greg Venning. Welcome to the Questing Chiropractor. And today Nimrod is interviewing Rob Sinnott, who is an internationally recognized chiropractor, an author and a thought leader in the world of chiropractic with a big C. He has over 33 years of experience, and he has transformed countless chiropractors, me included, through his inspiring approach and commitment to the wonder of human adaptability. He's a graduate of Palmer College, and his work bridges clinical excellence with heartfelt purpose, and he blends being in practice with advancing research and championing chiropractic philosophy through its education and his writing. He is the distinguished author of Sinnott's textbook on chiropractic philosophy, which serves as a cornerstone of chiropractic education worldwide, and the textbook of human adaptability, which is something that has really shifted my perspective on what we do. He's truly an inspiration for fostering human potential and embracing the human being's innate intelligence. This podcast showcases how Rob illuminates a path to true chiropractic and changing the trajectory of people's lives. Listen on. Welcome to the Questing Chiropractor podcast. We help you grow as visionary, vital, and capable chiropractors who are always on. We do things differently as we help to elegantly awaken your innate wisdom within. We help you create robust, predictable, and trustworthy practices that serve oceans of people and yet still have free time for yourselves and your families. We use neuroscience to deliver better business results so that you can get greater, deeper, and more effective impact in more ways. We are Questing Chiropractors, and this is our story.
So this is Nimrod here, and the great pleasure to be spending some time with Rob Sinnott. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's precious. I know you're busy and you do a lot for this profession.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. Time is precious for everyone these days. So, I think we have some important things to talk about. So I look forward to what we're going to get to this hour.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've had the pleasure of interacting with you in various ways for a few years now, and you never fail to stimulate me and to keep me, on that true north. And I think that's so needed in this profession. And I know, for you, what the sense I always get from you is you want to really bring the importance of a much deeper understanding of our philosophy and how that impacts us, impacts our practice, impacts our people, impacts our community, potentially world. Is that what's got the fire going for you?
Well, it is in a way. And for a lot of years, my first, at least 20 years out of practice, I was finding everything I could philosophical and digging into it. And, I would travel around the country here in the U.S. And, every time I could save up money for a plane fare, I was going to visit some old chiropractor from the 30s or 40s so I could soak up some of what they understood. And what I realized is they have such a familiarity with our philosophy that they could adjust what they were saying to any situation with any patient or anyone in the public to give a cogent message that was meaningful to that person. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's so important for practice, is because the deeper you understand a subject, the easier you can tweak it to fit, a conversation you might have, in an airplane and I remember, as a matter of fact, this is back about 20 years ago, I was flying from Chicago to St. Louis and then St. Louis to Little Rock, Arkansas. So it's 2 short flights. And the first flight, I read through 14 pages of notes I took. Bud Crowder, who was the last director of BJ's clinic, he was a 1947 grad, one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. He did a 1-hour lecture for our state association. And I took 14 pages of notes in an hour. I wrote everything that came out of that man's mouth. And I spent my first part of that flight from Chicago to St. Louis going through those notes. And on the way down, it popped into my head that this is just a safety pin would be the best way to explain this. And that's why I made the first of my safety pins, back 20 some years ago. But from St. Louis to Arkansas, which was only maybe an hour at the most, it isn't that far of a flight. Back then, the airline I was in, Southwest, they used to have 2 rows that faced each other. So you were facing, so there's 6 people all facing each other, and it was like a conversation pit almost. There were
Wow.
like 2 couches. It was just really weird. And you didn't sit there unless you like to talk to people. So as you know, I'm good with that. So there was 1 empty seat, and the other 4 people sitting there. By the time I had gone from St. Louis to Arkansas, I talked to them using this, this insight I kind of picked up from Dr. Crowder in a way, kind of putting together a lot of what he said. And all 4 of them asked for the name of a chiropractor. And I thought, I've been making this too hard. I need to find ways to get the message to people in simpler manner. That's, it doesn't have to be, super technical. Sometimes I think
Mhm.
that it's a mixture where we're not as familiar with the subject at a deep enough level that we can make those small, you know, adjustments to our verbiage, or it's an inferiority complex that I feel is rampant in our profession, where we feel we have to blow them away with our intelligence. And sometimes we leave people in the dust because we overcomplicate things, which I think is another,
Mm.
that's another big problem. Our philosophy is very simple. I mean, when you really think about it, I mean, you're down to some basic ideas that, the conduit of the nerve system that innate intelligence uses to transmit that information. That's the master control system of everything. The neural integrity is very important. You know, when the ideas of what we have to get across to people. Do we have to have deep conversations about universal intelligence? Personally, I don't. I don't think there's a need for that. I don't talk about, the 31 steps of the normal complete cycle. I don't go, universal intelligence, innate intelligence, mental realm. I don't go through all of those.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because Stevenson in his textbook, he even states that we shouldn't memorize the 33 principles, but we should the 31 steps of the normal complete cycle. And when you think about that and you read, I believe it's Article 101 in his book, The Story, where he infuses that one page. It has all 33 principles, all 31 steps of the normal complete cycle, and they're woven together. And what's interesting about that is when you read things that the people wrote back in the 20s, and I have a lot of their thesis that they used for PhDs back then. You can tell that they have such familiarity with the philosophy that they can easily handle it, and work their way through it. And it's something we need to work more on as a profession today. But I think it's more difficult to do on your own. And I think that's why, it's nice to have groups of people get together and have discussions and colleagues that you can bounce things off of. And I think everyone needs that. Even if they don't have someone they would consider a philosophical mentor, at least they can have a colleague that's working through the same processes with them. I mean, that's very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Different perspective, seeing things from a different angle, or challenging your own perspective so that you rationalize it in your brain and work out, with logic, whether it holds or not. That process is huge. And I guess, it's interesting that you bring up that story of the chiropractors from the 30s and 40s, that they had such a good handle on the philosophy, which is a process of learning and engaging with it and digesting it and tussling with it as well. But the bit that interests me is not only that, but you said that they could communicate it effectively. And so that's not naturally a part of philosophy. We can sit in an armchair and hypothesize about philosophy, but the important thing for us as chiropractors in practice is, what difference is it going to make to someone?
That's very true. That's very true. And it's funny when you say, what difference is it going to make? It reminds me of here in the United States, we have the American Chiropractic Association, which has a kind of an antithetical approach to our philosophy. And back during the centennial, this would have been 95, I was out of school 6 years. And I saw Kerwin Winkler, who was the head of the ACA at the time, standing outside and behind the hotel where they had this event. And he was having smoking a cigarette. And I thought, I'm going to go ask him a question. So I walked out and I said, so I've gone through all the effort to figure out that this child has asthma. What do I do with that? And he looked at me and he shook his head, threw a cigarette in the ground, stamped it out, and walked inside. I thought, well, he doesn't know either. And I guess the point is, getting to the point of things that matter. The idea of the importance of the nerve system in every function we have. I mean, every sensation we have, every concept we have. I mean, everything goes through the nerve system, and it's so important to be able to bring that down to a conversational level. And another problem another thing that might be a problem is we're less conversant than we used to be. We use so much technology today to do our talking for us. We don't even use complete sentences when we write, and we're a little bit of a hot mess as a world today. And I think not being able to sit down with just anyone and strike up a conversation and being comfortable in that conversation, whether it's about chiropractic or not, is getting to be a bigger problem than it used to be. Those graduates, back in the 30s, we may think they didn't have the education we have, but their command of language was far superior to what we have today. I mean, when you look at, you can Google these things and look at the size of their lexicon, the number of terms that were commonly used 100 years ago. We're not too bright today, comparatively speaking. So, I mean, you have to understand lexicon, you have to have an understanding for why is this word slightly different than that word, and slightly different from that word. And the command of the languages that they had, of their language that they had, was so much larger in that context that I think it just made it easier for them to address and fit the needs of a moment, to have a meaningful conversation with someone. Just this morning, I had a woman come in with her 3 daughters, cute kids. And we were talking about breathing, and because her daughter, I had adjusted her, and she got up off the table and said, "Mom, I can take a deep breath now." And she says, "You're kidding." And she said, "No, I'm breathing fine." And now this was a week ago. So today they came back in and she's still breathing fine. And she's holding her adjustment, which is important, and which, quite honestly, is part of the verbiage we need to start using. How often should we see someone? Well, as long as they can hold an adjustment, that's great. To me, there's nothing better than when someone comes in and I said, "Wow, this is great. You've been holding your adjustment. You've been healing this entire time." That's an important concept for people to understand, that when they're holding, that that healthy processes are continuing in their body.
Yes.
But I don't know how we got on the subject, but I was talking with them about my first patient when I was a student. Was referred to me at Palmer, and it was a woman I worked with in the library. It was her nephew, and he was just a little bitty thing, and he was 37 inches long at 7 years old, and he came in a little bitty stroller, and his head would just hang, and he had very, very bad medically diagnosed cerebral palsy, and they'd say his name and his head would lift up for a second and go right back down. That was it. He couldn't reach for anything. She said, all we know about him is what food he doesn't like because he spits it out.
Right.
But the long and the short of it was, I looked for a subluxation and I adjusted him, and I saw him 3 Wednesdays in a row. And after the 3rd Wednesday, he crawled that afternoon, the first time, 100 feet. An hour after he crawled the first time. Now, my thinking is, I'm a genius. We have to get a diploma together and get me out of this school, because this place can't hold my massive intellect. And then I remembered that that woman talked me into taking care of him because brain studies had showed that parts of his brain had no electrical activity. Now, we use
Wow.
the same textbooks. We have Guyton's medical physiology in our
Mm,
schools, just like they do in medical schools. We learn the same information. I hadn't processed it to the point yet that I do now, but at that time I said, well, if whatever that part of the brain coordinates isn't possibly going to work right, I don't know what I could do for him. And she
mm,
convinced me to take care of him, or I would have left that kid right where he was. And that taught me an
yeah.
important lesson because once you see, it's kind of like, school puts these, and it's not the school's fault, but we get these blinders of this is what chiropractic is. And as soon as you start doing this and you see that there's a broader application for what we do as chiropractors than what you had formerly thought, you can never go back
Mm,
to this because you know it's not
no.
true. And I think that's something that comes with practice, comes with
Mm, mm,
seeing opening the idea that anyone with a nerve system and a spine that can be subluxated it needs to have the opportunity to be checked.
yeah.
As Reggie Gold used to say, the only thing chiropractic can't help is stupidity. So we can't make people come to chiropractors. There's a difference between ignorance and stupidity. I mean, stupidity is seeing that this is something you should look into and still saying, well, no, I can't do that. So
Mm. We're born ignorant, right? But
we
stupidity may
are.
be a choice along the way.
That's right.
But
We built.
that that point you just made, it reminds me of the Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that the mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original dimensions. And I think it's very much like that for us in practice, right? When we start to feel and see these things, and our expansion of belief of what is possible blows right out of the water, way beyond what my educated intelligence could ever imagine. And I think this is actually one of the things that goes against a lot of the new grads because, they like you said, the colleges teach them what they need to teach them. And one of the things they teach them is to use evidence-based or evidence-informed care, which David Sackett said relies on three things. What is your experience, which new grads have none? What is the other person's values? And if I can't communicate, then how am I going to determine their values? And then what does the evidence say? So I default to the only thing I can, which is I have no experience and I can't really determine their values. I'm going to go look what the evidence says. And if the evidence is not there for asthma or cerebral palsy, then why would I apply chiropractic?
Very true. And that evidence you may have may be what you've heard from either someone at school or some person that helped screw those blinders to the side of your head in the first
Totally.
place.
Totally.
Once you see the breadth of what we do, there's a scene in what is the name of that movie? Secretariat. I don't know if you remember that movie about the horse secretariat. There's a great scene, and Tobey Maguire, who plays Spider-Man, you may remember him from that.
Yeah.
He's the jockey. And so this horse, there's a scene where they're running it in the paddock to see how fast it is. And the trainer checks it with a stopwatch. And he said, this horse is fast in every direction, but forward, he said, it's like he forgot what a horse is. And so he takes the horse outside of the paddock, because basically all this horse knows what to do is just run in a circle and turn to the left the entire time. And it was trained as I'm not a horse expert, so if I screw this up, apologies to the horse people out there. But from my understanding, the purpose the Secretariat had up until that day was that it was the horse that pushed the horse in front of it. It never was the horse that would pass and get in front. Its sole purpose was to kind of spur the horse in front of it on by being right behind it, that it would go faster. And it didn't know what to do when it was the only horse out in the paddock. So he puts Tobey Maguire. You got Spider-Man on your back. It's a good start. So he puts Tobey Maguire on his back, and he said to him, how far do you want me to take him? And he said, until it stops. And he slapped the horse in the rear end, and Tobey Maguire goes flying off. And it's like the horse finally realized what a horse can do. And I think that's practice. I think that we get out into practice and we start going, wait, this doesn't make sense with what I thought was the
Yes.
limits of reality. So now it's, wait, this can't be it anymore. Now I know it's this, so I can never believe this. I have to believe this. And I think that's that growth that takes place as we get into practice and get going. It's difficult as a student, to see those things. I spent a lot of time in the using the Dewey Decimal System or whatever they use to do books in the Palmer Library. The RZ section was where all the old chiropractic books were. So I spent a lot of time in there just flipping through and reading things. And I don't remember reading a single case of low back pain. And I'm not raining on that parade, because you know what? Low back pain is part of the human experience.
Yep.
To say,
and a debilitating one.
yes, and it's a real thing, and to say that I've heard chiropractors who consider themselves extremely philosophical, and they won't have conversations about pain, but they love to tell you about this child that had epilepsy problems or whatever it might be. They had seizures, and now they don't have seizures anymore. And it reminded me of a story that Dr. Crowder, who I mentioned earlier, that 47 grad, I had asked him one day, because he ran BJ's clinic, so he'd seen some stuff. And I said, "Do you ever have a case that just sticks out in your mind?" And he said, "What do you mean, a miracle?" And I said, "I know laws of cause and effect. I understand it's not a miracle, but just something that you really kind of went home at the end of the day and thought, wow, that was something." He said, "Well, there's plenty." He said, "I remember one in particular. This young girl was brought into me, and she was blind. And he said, I did the full workup and everything, and he was upper cervical. And he said, I took her films, and he said, I set up on her and adjusted her. He was a toggle, palmar upper cervical specific toggle. And she got her vision on the table. And
Wow.
she walked outside with her mother, and while they were waiting for their ride, she sneezed. And when she sneezed, she went blind, and they brought her back in. Wow. And he checked her, and she had lost her, and he did another graph, and she had lost her adjustment. He adjusted her again, and she got her vision back. I said, "That's incredible." And you know what he told me? "No, it's not." I said, "Well, I don't know. Blind, not blind. I think that's cool." And he said, "Have you ever had a patient with these two fingers numb?" I said, "Sure." He said, "What's the difference between these two fingers and these two eyes? What's the difference?" And though he took the next 40 years of fun out of practice for me by saying that, it made me realize that I can't put limitations on what someone else's potential might be. Right. And I think that's important from a chiropractic perspective, is that we may have limitations because maybe we're new grads. And I'm not picking on new grads, because I was one, I still consider myself one. I'm only 35 years in. I've got a long way to go. But, we have our self-imposed limitations that we mistakenly ascribe to the people that come to see us. And all we have to do is have a few experiences where it flies in the face of everything that we think reality is. And we realize that our reality wasn't reality at all for that person. And there have been some weird ones. I had a man who was in his 80s who had polio when he was 7 years old, and his legs were paralyzed. And he, at 80, whatever it was, he was limping very badly down our hallway when I was going to sit down and talk with him. He never mentioned his leg. And I thought, this is kind of weird. What's going on with his leg? And I said, "I noticed you had a pretty significant limp. What's going on with your leg?" And he said, "Oh, man, I've had that since I was 7 years old." I said, 7 years old? That's 70 some years. What happened? And he said, "Well, I had paralytic polio, and this leg just never came back all the way. It's just been that way." And I talked to him a little bit about it, and I said, "Well, polio is interesting. I've never really had to deal much with polio, because today it's not really a huge issue for us." And I talked historically about chiropractic and polio, because I just thought it was interesting, just as a point of conversation. Well, beyond my expectations, within 2 weeks, he didn't have a limp anymore.
Wow.
Now, did I expect that? No, I didn't expect that. But it opened my eyes to say, hey, what right do I have to say that this guy's been this way for 70 years? He can't be better than that. And, the body's amazing. It's not that, people don't get better because of us. They get better in spite of us, in our limitations of our thinking sometimes.
Yes.
I may think to myself, boy, do I even want to get involved in this rat nest of a spine that I'm looking at on this spinograph? It's like, oh my God, this is a mess. And you've seen this, I'm sure too. And
Yeah.
inevitably, some of those worst ones that you look at and think, yuck,
Mm,
they come around
mm.
and they're doing great. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is amazing. So, Rob, I want to stop you about a couple of points that you made. One is that, we do have those blinkers, and the more that we get exposed to these amazing things in chiropractic, is an opportunity for us to expand. But sometimes people choose not to, right? Sometimes it's a blinkered life is better because I know what I'm dealing with. I'm safe and secure, and I don't have to look left or right too much. And that can really reduce our opportunities in practice. Are you seeing that happening with new grads or experienced chiropractors as well?
Well, I don't like to pick on new grads because I totally understand where they're at. They have a significant
Mm,
amount of debt today. Um,
mm,
I was just talking with Gail about it this morning, trying to remember what I was paying, what my payments were for my student loans,
mm,
and I don't want to say because it's
mm.
almost too small. These students will all just turn this off. But um, but yes, we think we know so much that
Mm,
we have to realize we don't, and that's difficult when we don't have we don't have experience
mhm,
to lean on. So we're inexperienced, so we don't have a safety line, so to speak, if we totally let go
mm,
of our limitations that we feel that should
mm.
be in place for other people. You know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yes,
I do think that's
yes.
more of a problem maybe for newer grads. There's a lot of them that totally defy that concept too. I mean, there's
Yep,
no
yep.
fit mold of anything. There's some brilliant young
No.
people out there. And at the same time, when I first got out of practice, I spent 2 years as an associate in the bowels of the slave ship down the streets from where I practice now. And this gentleman's long passed away. He was a 1954 grad from National College, and he
Mm.
used to say things to me when I was a new grad. Like we'd have a conversation about something, and he'd say, "You're too smart to be a chiropractor. You should go back to school and be an MD." And I'm like, "What? What a strange comment to make." And he told me one time, he said, "You're a chiropractic zealot." And I said, "Well, isn't that a good thing? Because if
Yes.
I repaired washing machines, I should be passionate about knowing everything I can about
Yeah,
washing machines because
yeah.
this is what I've chosen to do with my life." I
Mm,
just don't
mm.
understand why that's a negative. But his claim to fame, as he told me, was that he sent Jim Winterstein to school, who was the president of National for many years. So
Let's not get political yet, Rob.
no, 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 no. I don't mean anything. I don't mean anything. I'm just saying that he didn't come from a philosophical
Right,
background, but
right.
we had some definite different ideas. And I had a gentleman in Friday who's been coming to see me for 30 couple of years, and
Wow.
he comes every few weeks with his wife, and just to get checked. Doesn't always need to be adjusted, but and it's funny since he was a school teacher, and in our country, in America, school teachers are under a lot of pressure. It used to be that parents would take the school teacher's side, not their kid's side, and that's
Yeah.
not happening anymore.
It's
And
changed.
I don't
It's
know if it is
changed.
everywhere, but that's how it is here. And also administrators used to have the teachers' backs.
Mm.
So they'd always back them up, and the administrators don't do that either. So really, nobody likes the teachers anymore because the students never did. So that's not new. But as soon as this man retired, I had to adjust him. He had a lumbar problem that I would have to work on probably. I'll conservatively say it was probably every other time he came in. So maybe once a month I'd have to
Mm.
set this lumbar, and it was years, 20 some years. So he retired, and I'm not lying to you, within a month, I don't think I've touched that thing 3 times in the last 5
Wow.
years. It's
Isn't
just
that
the amount of
interesting?
stress. And in this
Mhm.
world, people are so loaded with stress. And it's I
Yes.
mean, the idea of chiropractic really boils down to how we adapt to stressors. This is a very stressful world. We are so in fight or flight all the
Yep.
time. And if it's
Yep.
not someone that we're having a disagreement with, it's because somebody didn't like the picture of my lunch, and it's stressing me because I don't know. I put a nice picture of my lunch up. Why doesn't anybody like the picture of my lunch? It's just,
We create these. We really
we do.
create
We
these.
we need
Yeah.
this dopamine hit that we never used to need
Well,
before.
there's part of the problem, isn't it? So I want to pull us right back to philosophy and kind of keep it,
Mhm.
go maybe deductively from the basics. One thing that interests me that you threw in there passion, that you were passionate, you're a zealot. And I'm wondering whether that's part of really what is missing, is that we can do a very reductionistic, mechanistic look at chiropractic, bone out a piece and push it back in. Yeah, what does the evidence tell me? That works to a certain degree, but it's going to reach a certain limit. And I'm curious whether you feel that the philosophy expands our perspective to the degree that we then become passionate about chiropractic and curious about it. What does the philosophy give us beyond nervous system not working? Let me crank it up and get it working.
Well, that's a great question, and I can give you my own experience with this. Like I said, my first 20 years, I tried to soak up everything I could from everyone I could, and trying to put pieces together. And my first, the philosophy textbook I wrote was really a cathartic experience for me, because I needed to get out what I understood on paper. And it was, to be honest, from that point, it was harder for me to feel that zeal about philosophy, that fire about philosophy. Not that I don't, but it was different for me after that, because I'm looking for new questions. I'm always looking for something new. And what I decided is that, our profession, we've always had this schism of science is over here, philosophy is over here. And one side says we're the scientists, and one side says we're the philosophers. Both of those people are nuts as far as I'm concerned, because we have to have an understanding of both to have an understanding of either. At the basis of science is philosophy. So if you don't understand our philosophy, how can you ask questions about our science? Totally. It doesn't make sense. At the same time, when you look at our philosophy, to me, I understand that how we adapt to these stressors of life, whether it's a psychological stress, which we all understand, because Hans Selye, of course, brought that term from mechanical engineering into our profession, not our profession, into healthcare. Yeah. But we have physical stresses, which are also obvious to people. But right now, the 4 rules of health are, you pick your grandparents very carefully. You don't breathe the air, drink the water, eat the food. We've wrecked everything. We spray in our country. We have genetically messed with our crops so that we can spray them with Roundup, and it kills everything else. And I don't think that's probably the healthiest solution. So we have to start some way of thinking of how do we cope with these stressors. And as a chiropractor, we have a very unique input to this. If we say our philosophy is a philosophy of how we adapt, which it really is, a subluxation will diminish that of body's ability to adapt. We can measure this. We can show mathematically. We're talking about, we talk about p-values of 0.05 as being significant. There's a 95% chance. It's a 95%. There's a 5% chance that something is just a matter of chance and not related to what we're thinking it is. So 0.05 is what we're thinking about. Some of these mathematical algorithms that we're using now to look at pre and post adjustment, they have p-values of 0.01 times 10 to the negative 11th to 14. Wow. We have nothing like this that we've ever done with our science in chiropractic before. Wow. So I just had a woman the other day who had fertility issues. So I did a pre and post EKG on her. It takes me 5 minutes, before and after the adjustment. And she was thrilled to death to do it. And I ran her stuff through the algorithm just out of curiosity. And I can show mathematically. Now, when you do an EKG, you're looking at cardiovagal. This is what you're looking at. This is it. You're not looking at the rest of the nerve system. You're looking at cardiovagal. But the interesting thing about these 3 particular algorithms is that you can extrapolate that to the coordination of the entire being. So I can mathematically show that her entire being was better coordinated after that adjustment. And what's interesting is I set her sacrum. I set a base posterior sacrum, like that sacrum shifts backwards behind that 5th lumbar. I set that. That's what I did. Now, wow. Scientifically, we know that the vagus nerve doesn't go down there. That's the pelvic nerve, and the pelvic nerve, so the only way the vagus nerve here, these vagus nerves too, because there's a pair, the only way they connect with can make a connection with the adjustment of the sacrum is to make a change back through the brain and back down through the
Yes.
sacrum again. And this is why I wanted to do these types of things, to show that even when we don't work anywhere near that vagus nerve, we still have a change that happens through the vagus nerve, because the body is just so intricate. And, now one of the big things is vagal nerve stimulators, where they'll
Yes,
put
or the
something
whole
in the ear.
Polyvagal theory is
and that's
everywhere.
yes, and Stephen Porges is. It's funny. I asked one of his colleagues who's been doing this since the early '70s. He's doing the same work. I asked him one day. I was down at Ohio State in Ohio here, where he's a professor, and I said to him, I said, what do you think of Porges' theories about the vagus? And he said, well, Stephen would be the first one to tell you he's right. And I thought, wow, they're kind of catty, these scientists, But when you think about a vagal nerve stimulator, the vagus nerve can slow down one function, speed up another function. The left vagus nerve comes down and hooks across and goes across the right side of our body to the liver. And when we think about that, it can cause so many different functions to happen in the liver at once that aren't all the same in that same autonomic sense. So it just doesn't scream, activate the vagus nerve. That's not health. We'we've confused this. You can lower heart rate variability and show that someone is healthier. Bedwetters are a good example of that. They have a higher heart rate variability than kids that don't bedwet. So when you adjust a bedwetter, I would expect that heart rate variability to go down. But when I take that data and I throw it into these 3 algorithms, the complexity of their system, their entire system, increases. So what it was the monkey was driving the car. I mean, there's a lot of action in that steering wheel, but it's not the chauffeur. The chauffeur, the steering wheel's not doing as much. The car's not jerking all over the place, but it's actually in a healthier state. So, in general, yes, most things you'll see heart rate variability go down, but sometimes it goes up. And do you know what it should be? No. They could have a duodenal ulcer. Same thing. Heart rate variability should go down with a duodenal ulcer problem when they're adjusted, in theory, because a duodenal ulcer is just the opposite of a gastric ulcer. So a lot of confusion in the body. And when we start looking at what we look for passion, I started to move into science much deeper shortly after my first textbook. And I have conversations with people outside our profession that I don't have inside of our profession. It's unfortunate, but it's where we are today.
So just to drill home on one of those points that you made, there is really this desire from the outside in, to stimulate, to inhibit, to, change functions within the body, settings within the body. But that really reeks of the allopathic mindset, right? And it's as you mentioned in a bit of a throwaway comment there, how the hell would we know through our own educated intelligence what that being needs in every milli-moment of their life? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, that's true. Well, we also know that the correct amount of time to have a subluxation is none.
Yes.
There's no amount, and that's when I hear that the subluxation is an adaptation. It makes me a little crazy because, okay, it's an adaptation. Then what's the proper amount of time for your nerve system to be interfered with so mental impulses can't travel to where they need to? Why would innate intelligence say this is a good thing? It doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make any sense. But we still have, we still hear that out there, and it's a frustration for me because, that communication is so vital for every function that we have. You can adjust someone. I've had that little girl that got her, was able to breathe better. I've had the exact same thing from toggle, which affects the upper cervix, which is more of a parasympathetic, from that approach of sympathetic parasympathetic compared to something in the upper thoracics, which I adjusted on this little girl. That I wasn't going after her upper thoracic because, I heard breathing problem. This is the breathing button. I mean, there's no such thing. We didn't roll out of, Detroit, Michigan. There's not a car manual that we can go to for your year and look it up and go, follow a wiring diagram. It doesn't work like that. And when we start deciding what the outcome should be, I mean, we've all seen this where someone has come in with some issue. I remember a little girl who had a very bad spina bifida, and her parents were hoping she would get bowel and bladder control. Oh no, yeah, so she would get her bladder control. She didn't get
Mm.
bladder control, but what happened is every time she would be adjusted when she was subluxated, she would go home and she would cough up this bucket of green vomity stuff, and then she felt fantastic and could breathe really well for a few days. Well, it wasn't that I pushed the wrong button. I adjusted what we found, and that's the thing. We have to realize that you know we can't we can't take the place of what the innate intelligence of the body is determining. We can't override that. We can't override it in ourself. We can't override it in someone else. I can't decide,
Yeah.
well, when I give you this adjustment, this is going to cause, whatever change to take place. Well, this is going to cause your heart rate variability to go up because it may well go down. And that may be
Yeah.
just exactly what your body needs you to do.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so it's all about trusting their own innate intelligence to adapt and to comprehend itself within the body and within its environment as well. Really coming back to that one cause, one cure
And
idea
that's
that we
not to
have.
minimize the role that young doctors have when they take care of people as chiropractors. I'm not minimizing that the chiropractor doesn't have a role. We have a very important role because the communication system is it. That's what we are. I mean, that's the essence of what we are.
Mm.
We've all had, anyone with a few years of experience has had someone come in and say things like, "Oh, my wife told me I have to come in forever because I'm not a jerk anymore," or just some weird thing like that. I don't drill into it and ask what that means because I think it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. But that wasn't my plan. The body does what the
Yeah.
body does. It's,
Yeah.
we've all seen
Absolutely.
people's personality change.
Totally.
I've had the experience where you've adjusted people and they get off the high low and they wrap their arms around you and give you a hug. And then they realize what
Yeah.
they're doing there. And then they start apologizing. It's like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Some people have an emotional change afterwards. It's fine. Don't,
Absolutely. Lots of crying, lots of physiological
yes.
responses. It all happens. So, Rob, I'm curious, you said that you've simplified your explanation in your communication. What would be your entry point with people if you were to have an overarching principle that you started with? Where would be the starting?
Well, getting them to understand that the nervous system is the master control system.
Mm.
Getting them to understand the body is self-healing.
Mm.
If you cut a branch off of a tree, what happens to if you look at it the next year, does it keep oozing sap forever? Or, where you cut the branch, what happens to the branch? Does it get a scar over you know what I mean? It's the body does the same thing. I don't know why we think it's different. I mean, we can do simple things. I like to use the example of a sunflower. I have a windowsill by my adjusting table, so I like to look at I put a sunflower in the window. I like it, so I turn it to face me in the room. And I go about my morning and, unbeknownst to me, was probably one of them kids went over and turned it. Now it's facing out the window. So I turn it back to
Mm.
face me. And it's time for lunch. I go to lunch, I come back. And I don't know who has a key to my office, but somebody came in and turned that plant back around, and
Yeah.
everybody figures out what you're doing. You know what I mean? That plant's going to turn to face the sun. Why does the plant turn to face the sun? It turns to face the sun because that's the healthiest state for a plant to be. Is it needs that light, that sun energy. So when does a plant stop doing that?
Yeah.
You know,
Hopefully never.
at the
When it's
moment
dead.
it dies. So a dead plant, that's when they stop adapting. And that's what life is. Life is adapting. That's what we do.
Mm.
It's what we do when we're alive. That range of adaptability is fairly wide when we're younger, and it gets a little narrower as we get older. Our heart range, it approximates 100 to 105 beats a minute when we get closer to the end of our life, because it has less input from areas of the nerve system than it used to help control and adapt for situations. We just kind of start running, in a different sense. But, getting people to understand, the self-healing, that the nerve system's the master system, that the spine, one of the purposes of the spine is to protect the nerve system. And that protection is lost when there's a subluxation. And it's not a difficult thing. A lot of us have probably used a rubber band with a kid. I did it with these little girls. I took one of them who was the loud one, and I put a little
Yeah.
rubber band on her finger. I said, I want to just do an experiment. I'll put that on your finger. That doesn't hurt too. I put it on good and tight. I said, that doesn't hurt too much, does it? Well, no. I said, okay, well, let's just leave it on there for a minute. And I talked to a different sister for a minute, and pretty soon this one was over here trying to show me her finger that it's starting to get uncomfortable. I said, is that starting to bother you? She said, yeah. I said, well, let's massage it. Just work it like this. Come on, rub it. No, rub it hard. Really work that finger.
Yeah.
She does. I said, okay, stop. Feels a little better, doesn't it? She said, yeah. I said, okay. And I go back to doing something else. And we go through this whole litany of different things. You could take a pill. You could, there's all kinds of things you can do to feel it less. And what if I, as a chiropractor, remove that interference and your finger still feels uncomfortable? Should we put it back on?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no good time to have that subluxation. There's no right amount of time.
Absolutely.
And if we can get people to understand that, I've always said that if people can understand Masha and Dasha, the Russian conjoined twins who were born around 1950, if they can understand that they had circulatory systems that interconnected. So if one of them had a pathogen in their system, it would go through the bloodstream. If it was in the bloodstream, it's going through both of their bloodstreams. They had separate nerve systems. Spine and nerve system were separate. They would have childhood diseases separately. They would have a cold separately. Well, how can this be? This flies in the face of everything that makes sense from, only looking at things through the germ theory that germs cause disease.
Absolutely. So you're touching on science, and I'm curious to hear from your perspective. And you said, you're moving the philosophy through the research and the science. What do you think are some of the most interesting questions we should be exploring in the chiropractic profession?
To be honest, Dee Dee's first question, the question that to me started our philosophy, why? Why are two men working in the same shop at the same bench, breathing the same air, eating the same food? Why is, this man is sick and this man is healthy? Why? And he wasn't asking why this man was sick. He was asking why, the why of health. And that's what makes us different as chiropractors, is that we look at health as the thing. Health is the entity. You lose health. You don't get sick. That's a fallacy. They've done studies with newborns and neonatal intensive care units in some of the larger hospitals. And what they do is they hook them up to EKGs. Now premature babies, they have a very high rate of sepsis. And when they get sepsis, by the time they figure out they have it, it's usually too late and they don't make it. So what they're doing now is they look at the EKG and they're looking at live the level of adaptability in that child. And then when they see it start to drop, they know in 2 days that child's going to have sepsis because now it's stress susceptible. And that's important for us to start bringing into our practices, the idea of stress susceptibility. So if, say, you're upper cervical and you use a graph unit and you get the graph on the screen, or if you're Gonstead and you use skin temperature and you see the break, whatever, or you do leg checks, whatever it is people do, when you see someone isn't adapting, they're stress susceptible. It's a good thing we're checking you today because you have some real stress susceptibility and you're not ready to face the world till we get this taken care of. And if they're holding their adjustment or they're stress vulnerable, either word, and you can take those terms, put them in quotes, throw them up on Google Scholar, look at stress vulnerability, look at stress susceptibility. The science is maddening that we're not involved in this in chiropractic. It makes me crazy. At the same time, you can be stress resilient. That's the other side of things. You're holding an adjustment, you're stress resilient. You're doing great. You're ready to face the week. Get out there and go at them. The idea that losing the adjustment is a problem is something we need to get across to people and into chiropractors, because we think of, hey, if they don't need to be adjusted, well, then, I'm not doing my job. I have to find something. But if there's nothing there, there's nothing there.
Absolutely. So just touching on that stress resilience and stress susceptibility, has that got to do with the communication that innate intelligence is able to express itself in order to comprehend itself and its environment? Is that how you're seeing the relationship happening?
Yes, I absolutely. And quite honestly, that math I referred to before can show it. I mean, we can show it to ridiculous probability levels that, yes, this is true. This is what's going on. And it's funny, in our profession, when I talk with people about the subluxation, when I talk about, that, Stevenson talked about in his books, which he says he uses Dr. Palmer's definition. But, those four components of the subluxation, the loss of juxtaposition, the you know, when you get to that whole process, you get to the mental impulse. That's when people start losing their minds. They start to, well, the mental impulse, we can't measure the mental impulse. Okay. But we can measure the effect of mental impulse. What is the purpose of a mental impulse? The purpose of a mental impulse is to cause that tissue cell to adapt for this moment in time. It's a constant stream of messages of adaptation to every tissue and cell of the body. And the vagus nerve can tell a vagal increase to one cell and a vagal decrease to other tissues. It's not just, and that's why I have slight, and I'm not saying people shouldn't do vagal nerve stimulating. I understand they're using it for cancer and things like that. I would never begrudge anybody the opportunity to try something. Fine. But the thing is, the body, the innate intelligence isn't just screaming down the nerve. And it's also a two-way street. So, what effect is it having when you do vagal nerve stimulating, when it goes back up into the central
Totally.
architecture? What's happening there? There's a lot we really don't know yet. But, I think that when we look at Dee Dee's question, that is the answer. That one is stress resilient, one is stress vulnerable, but we're not doing the science we need to. We're getting closer. Life College last year, maybe 2 years ago, I posted something about, if there's any college presidents out there that want to get the best equipment available, contact me. And Rob Scott from Life reached out immediately and said, I want you to put these people in touch with our research person down there, which I did. And they bought everything that Mindware makes. Mindware's a really good company, but they bought everything that they make. And they're looking at long COVID symptoms. So they're looking at long COVID symptoms and the chiropractic before and after adjustment. And they're also running it through these 3 algorithms on my website. Now, the algorithms on this website are free. I don't know who uses them. I just get the bill. So I don't know anything about, it's 100. I wanted it 100% anonymous and 100% free, because I think they're that important for people to use. It took me 3 years to find these, and it was because of a challenge that a professor at Ohio State gave me a few years ago when I had him speak for us in Chicago. He said, those algorithms, he said, I don't think they do everything that you think they do. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't think those algorithms are there yet. So that put me on a several-year mission to find some that do. And these 3, in the past 2 years, I have found no holes in them yet. So we have some very strong things. And I think we're there where we can answer Dee Dee's question about the why of health. And, it's something that we need to get more into our own minds too, is that health is the thing. That child that gets sepsis isn't the problem. They didn't have sepsis when their adaptability decreased, but it made them vulnerable to it. And that's the problem. When we start dipping, we hit that vulnerability level, and bad things can happen to us. There are in that polio epidemic years back, if you and I were brothers living in the same house, sorry, I'm going to make you be related to me for a second, but we're in, years ago here in America, back in the 40s, you didn't have your own bedroom. There was 2 of you to a bedroom, because houses didn't have 60,000 square feet back then. They were smaller, but I have paralytic polio. My legs don't work, and you're forced to, and I'm in quarantine. This is a real quarantine, not that BS quarantine from a couple of years ago where we got to do whatever we want. We had to wear a mask. But, the thing is, back then I couldn't leave my house. I was stuck in the house. And you being my brother, you have to sleep in the same room with me. I'm blowing out polio exhaust. Why are your legs fine?
Yeah,
it's because you're stress resilient and I'm stress vulnerable. Yeah. My body wasn't able to fend off that bacteria. It's the same thing I see with kids who have been diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. They have 7 bacteria they get checked for every 6 weeks in their lungs, and each of them will have 1 bacteria that's always there. Sometimes 2, but usually it's 1. And usually within, I would say that, I've seen it. I've always seen it by their very next test that their lungs are clear. Could it be that their body can't identify and deal with that particular bacteria. Why Staph aureus? Why not, why not
Mm.
any of these other from this list? Why is it always Staph aureus? Because their body can't identify and deal with that bacteria the way it's supposed to. It's just scientific logic. It's at that point. Now, do I know 100% that's it? No, but until a better explanation comes along, it's where we're at. But I've seen these kids and I've done these studies with them, these tests with them, and I can show what kind of changes we make. I did the same thing with COVID. During COVID, I had some pre and post adjustments during COVID. So when we hear from, that the powers that be that we're not allowed to talk about immune function in chiropractic, we don't have any data. To me, that letter that they sent April of 2020 telling the profession we can't talk about this, that was a confession. That was them saying,
Yeah.
you've been giving us money for 30, 40 years and we haven't done a damn thing. We've been sitting on our rear ends. And so to blame us for a lack of science in the field is ridiculous. When you won't let us have a role in this in science,
Well,
it
and
has to be, it has to be their fault. So if to me now, I can show mathematically with very high probability what I've seen pre and post adjustment with COVID. So we do have immunity data.
Yeah, and that's the thing, I think that responsibility needs to be taken, that they're the ones who were in charge of the money and the studies and the direction of the profession. But, now we're seeing, I guess, with social media, that a lot of that is coming to the grassroots chiropractor, that the power is coming back into those hands. So just in the last few minutes, Rob, and, we should keep these answers as short as possible.
Sorry.
That's all right. I could keep going with you for multiple podcasts, but for the listener, let's cut this off soon. So, the grassroots chiropractor is facing a lot of things, and we know that more and more chiropractors are doing more and more different things. Without getting into a big conversation about all of those other things that chiropractors are doing, what is the potential of just sticking to the communication that innate intelligence does via the nervous system to allow the body to function at its best? And the role of the chiropractor is to find the subluxation that's there and put in that adjustive thrust. What's the potential?
Well, the potential, we don't even know because we don't understand. I mean, to be honest, we have a limited perception of the intelligence that's running our bodies in that sense. So from, we have, our 5 senses or 6, well, I suppose we can enumerate 12 different senses we have now without getting into that today. But without, being able to really understand the richness of what health really means, it's difficult for us. We can only look at the things we can look at and measure. But I think it's beyond our comprehension right now to even answer that question. I think it's limitless, and I think it's like that horse that, when it got outside of the paddock and got to run like a real horse, and it got to see what a horse can really do. You're never going to get those blinders back on that horse again. It's never going to believe it's just about certain types of uncomplicated low back pain and headaches. Not that those things are wrong, but that's very limiting. We hear about narrow scope and broad scope. And the reality is the correct terminology is narrow application versus broad application. Broad application is if you have a subluxation, you need to see a chiropractor. I mean, that's all there is to it. You need to be checked for subluxation throughout your life. I have been under care since I was 17 years old. I've never gone more than 14 days without getting checked. I don't always need to be adjusted. As I'm getting a little bit older, I typically do. But I've never missed a day of work in my entire life. So, I know it's one person. It's hard to really say what that means, and it's true. But at the same time, I'm around things all day. You're around people all day with problems. They come in because they feel unhealthy. And to get people to understand that health is the entity, health is the thing. Health is the thing we can measure. We can measure it through coordinative capacity, through that, some of these algorithms. Just as an example, there are other means that people are using in other areas of science to measure these things too. But we can see that even though I feel great now, I'm measurably in a higher state what was I really that great before? Do you know what I mean? Just because I don't feel a symptom doesn't mean I'm healthy, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Subjective is not reliable. It's one of the factors that's important for us. It's part of my life, my subjective experience, but it's certainly not reliable for health.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Rob, just to close this off, and you left it there at such a great message of coming back to health and focusing on health and what we can do for people. If more chiropractors did this in the world, where would we be? Where would we go as a profession and as a species as well?
That's a great question, and it's only speculation, of course, but if we were all using the same, giving simple messages, and I always say I enjoy practice because I get to tell people the truth all day. I don't have to make things up, I don't have to pretend there's an answer to everything. A lot of times the correct answer is I don't know. I mean, and it's the truth, because a lot of times no one knows an answer to something. But, if we all were talking the same, even if it isn't the same terms, if we were getting the idea that we're self-healing, if we're getting the idea that the nervous system's a master system, if we're getting the idea that a subluxation interferes with that coordination, and if we're getting the idea that an adjustment the aim of an adjustment is to remove that interference so that the innate intelligence of the body can do what it does to maintain health and restore health. It's not me. I'd love it to be. I would love it to be all the things you and I get accused of every day of helping people with. I would love it to be me, because I'd be really cool, but I'm not. So I know that's not it. And I think if we were all at least talking about those 4 simple truths in our practices every day, we'd be a lot farther. Because I don't know how it is in Europe so much, but I know here in the States, a lot of people go to chiropractors and never get an adjustment. They haven't seen the chiropractor since the first visit because they get, different, I don't know, things done to them, and I'm not belittling those things, but the sad thing is, for the time it takes a chiropractor to wrap a knee, they could have checked several people. Who's doing the greater good? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm not saying that helping people in any way isn't a thing, but as far as making the profession move forward, we just don't have time to waste anymore. There are so many people out there. Now I'm hearing Olympians, and I'm watching a lot of the Olympic trials, in the evening, and I'm seeing them talk about going to see their physio. And that's wasn't even a word in this country 5 years ago. They might say physiotherapist or whatever, but a physio wasn't even a thing. And, you couldn't go directly to a physical therapist until 10 years ago in this country. You had to go through an MD to get to a physical therapist. And, they're going to be eating our lunch, because they're going to figure out, that there's something more to what we don't want. And they're going to pick through our waste bins and take our philosophy and run with it and pretend that we stole it from them. So I'm not picking on them either, but we have a unique role that is so important and so vital. Every man, woman, and child and infant, and I believe fetus, can show an improvement after an adjustment. I'm working on that. So that's a several-year project. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it.
Beautiful, beautiful, Rob. And, thank you so very much for all that you do. It's a huge role that you have to play in this profession and the impact that you have. And I know that many very grateful for your understanding, for your application through science, for your communication, clarity, and your contributions. Thank you very, very much, Rob. I'm sure many chiropractors will have a greater impact tomorrow as a result of it.
Absolutely my pleasure. And I'll see you in August.
Yes.